next video tutorial, we're going to be talking about one of the scarier subjects in Photoshop. That is layers. That's right. Layers are one of the most powerful tools Photoshop has to offer, and getting the most out of the totally rad actions is going to require you to know a thing or two about them, but for a lot of people it can be intimidating, confusing, and just downright scary. So we're going to tackle that, and at the end of this you'll be a pro, or at least know all that you need to know to get the most out of the best action set around. So the first question we need to answer is, what are layers? Layers are basically a way for you to break up your document in Photoshop into its different elements and different components so that you can deal with them individually. Really is pretty simple, and the analogy that makes the most sense is akin to what traditional animation used to look like back in the day, before everything was all computer done. Talking back when they would draw on little sheets of celluloid individually every element of the frame, starting with the background layer that has the backdrop, adding in all the characters and different things that they wanted to put into that frame, one on top of the other, and then they'd shoot it with the camera from the top down. Everything would then be sandwiched together in one final image, but they had the flexibility to manipulate each individual cell, character, or creation in the frame separately. Layers give you the same kind of flexibility, but they go even farther than that in that they allow you to add adjustments to the stack instead of just pixels. First, we need to talk about where your layers live. Unlike the actions, there is no layer land, unless you want to create your own funny analogy about that, but they do live over on the same side of the screen, over there on the right, along with all your other tool palettes, and the functionality you'll find in the Layers palette is really similar to the Actions palette. You can select and change the options for different layers, and you can also group them together using layer sets. Layer sets are created the exact same way by clicking on the folder icon at the bottom of the Layers palette, and then you can drag layers in and out of the sets in order to organize them and show or hide them as a group. The layers within the Layers palette I like to think of as your layer stack. Now within your layer stack you can have adjustment layers and you can have pixel layers. Pixel layers are just like any other picture in that you can draw on them and manipulate them directly. They contain image data and can be any color, shape, or texture, or whatever that you want. Adjustment layers, on the other hand, are sort of like interactive filters. They allow you to take some of the commands from the image adjustment section of Photoshop and apply them to images in an interactive way that you can go back and change after the fact. Really cool, allows you a lot of flexibility that you can't get any other way. One thing that you're going to want to do a lot of is toggling layers on or off within your layer stack. The way you do this is by clicking the layer or layer set that you want to show or hide, and then click that little eyeball icon to the left. That will toggle the visibility of that entire layer or layer set so you can see how it's affecting the overall composition of layers within your photo. Another trick you might want to use is to alt-click or command-click with the Mac on that same little eyeball icon, and this will show or hide everything but the layer that you've selected. This is really handy if you want to look at the background layer without all the layers attached to it to see what kind of progress you've made by adding everything on top. One other important point to make is that the order of layers within the layers stack makes a difference as to how the final image looks. Especially if you have, for instance, a black and white conversion layer somewhere in the stack, everything below that is going to be rendered black and white, and everything above will manipulate the color. When Photoshop looks at the document, it starts with the bottom and applies all the layers in the stack from the bottom up. So when it reaches that point where it sees a layer that makes everything black and white, anything below that alters color isn't going to make a difference in the final project. You can see this effect for yourself by running boring old black and white over an image and then adding a sepia tone on top of it. If you rearrange the order of those layers by dragging them around within the layer stack, you'll notice that with the sepia layer on top, you actually get toning, and with the black and white layer on top, it's basically desaturated that sepia layer. Make sense? Good. So most of the actions in the Totally Rad action mix are going to create their own layer or set of layers as a final product. Run the action, and then over on the right hand side of the screen you'll see a new layer pop up that says Technicolor Dreamworld or Magic Glasses or whatever action you just ran. One quick way to change the strength of the effect of that entire action is by using the opacity slider. Make sure that you have the layer that you want to affect selected, and then click on the opacity slider and drag it around to affect the strength of that layer's effect within the whole document. You can do this at any point, going back to layers that are in the bottom of the stack or somewhere up on top, clicking them on and off, and using opacity to adjust the strength of that in order to get the mix that you want. This is one of the most powerful things about the Totally Rad action mix, and that it allows you to interactively change the strength of the effect of each action to come up with your own custom mix for every photo. One other quick shortcut in dialing in the opacity or strength that you want for any given layer is to click on that layer and with, for instance, the crop or marquee tool selected, something that doesn't have an opacity value of its own, you can then just use the number keys over on the right-hand side of your keyboard to quickly dial in whatever opacity you want. For instance, if you just hit 5 once quickly, it'll give you 50% opacity. You hit 7, it'll give you 70%. If you type in, for instance, 2-7 in rapid succession, then you'll get 27%. This way, you don't need to mess with the slider, and you can just use the hands on the keyboard to quickly dial in whatever effect you want for those layers. Saves you a little bit of time when you get going quickly. The next thing to talk about is one of the most confusing topics in Photoshop for most people, and that is layer masks. Layer masks are actually pretty simple if you think of them as a giant light bulb for your layer. Wherever the layer mask is light, you're going to be able to see, and where it's dark, you can't see. Makes sense, right? You can see things with the light on, and with the lights off, you can't. Same applies to layer masks. Wherever you have a light value in your layer mask, the layer that it's attached to will show through, and wherever you have a dark value attached to your layer mask, the layer won't show through. Beat that through your head until it makes sense. Light you can see, dark you can't see. Really basic and simple analogy that'll help you remember which side is up when you're dealing with manipulating layer masks. Now, layer masks exist, again, over on the right-hand side of the screen, next to the layer thumbnail. Pixel layers are going to have a thumbnail that looks like a miniature representation of what they contain. Adjustment layers, on the other hand, are going to have a little icon that represents what kind of tool they are. If a layer does have a layer mask, then you can select the layer mask and use the trash can icon to delete it. And if a layer doesn't have a layer mask, then you can make sure that you have the layer selected and click that little circle in a square icon to add one. Once in a while you'll want to do this for actions that don't create a layer mask automatically, for instance Boutwell Magic Glasses. Now, most of the time layer masks are going to pop up all white, which means that that layer is going to apply everywhere in the photo. However, we do something a little backwards with the Totally Rad actions that you'll appreciate once you understand how it works. We sometimes will give you a layer that has an inverted mask. What this means is that after the actions run, it's not going to apply anywhere in the photo. Yin Yang, Pro Retouch, Big Blue, Green with Envy, and Good vs. Evil all do this trick. What this allows you to do is simply and quickly specify where you want that action to apply in the photo just by manipulating the layer mask. First, make sure you have the brush tool selected, make sure the blending mode on the brush tool is set to normal, and make sure that the opacity on the brush tool is set to 100%, and put the flow at about 33 or so. Next, verify that your foreground color is set to white, and your background color is set to black. One quick way to do this is to press D, which resets the palette to black and white, and then X to reverse them. This works on Mac and PC and is a quick way to make sure that you have white and black set up. D and then X. Next, now that you have your brush set up, all you need to do is click and drag in the photo on the area that you want to affect. So for instance, if you ran Green with Envy on this photo, you'd click and drag on the areas that you want to green up or make a little bit more lively. Really simple. Run the action, and then with a white brush, hit the areas that you want to affect. One other note on using the brush tool is that generally things are going to work better if you use a big, soft brush. It'll make the transitions between the light and the dark areas of your mask a lot less noticeable and rough, and you can quickly dial in brush opacity by using the bracket keys just above the inner key on your keyboard. Left bracket and right bracket will increase or decrease the size of your brush, and if you hold down the shift key and use the left to right brackets, then you'll be able to quickly adjust the hardness of the brush, anywhere from a very hard round edge to something that's feathered out all the way almost like an airbrush. You can also see those changes up in the top left where you see the little icon for the brush tool telling you the size of the brush in pixels and giving you a little representation of what it looks like. Another tool that comes in handy in manipulating layer masks is the gradient tool. This comes in handy for situations where you want to make a gradual transition from one area to another but don't want to go through the trouble of hand painting it in. Big Blue is a great example of when to use this. Big Blue is our action for darkening skies and richening the color, and usually you want to make a gradual transition from the sky area to the ground area. The way you do this, select the gradient tool, make sure you have, again, white and black set as your foreground and background color, and then just click in the photo somewhere in the sky, drag and release somewhere near the ground. Automatically you'll see the thumbnail for the layer mask reflect that you have a smooth gradient from white to black, sky to ground, and you'll also have blended in the effect of that layer so that you don't have a hard edge where the sky meets the ground. You can also go in after the fact and subtract the effect of the action from areas that you don't want by using a black brush. Just like painting with a white brush is going to add that layer's effect to the document, painting with a black brush into the layer mask is going to take it away. So if you go over, for instance, a person that happened to have their head sticking up, you can just take the black brush after running the gradient tool and go and paint over the people to make sure that they aren't over blue and over rich. This is the way that I usually proceed in reworking my own images. Using the brush tool and the X key to flip back and forth between white and black, you can go back and forth between white and black in refining the layer mask, using white to add the effect to certain areas and black to subtract it where you think it's too strong. So, armed with that knowledge, you should be able to go forth now and get the most out of your totally rad actions. That's just about as complicated as things get, and actually, since it only took us a few minutes to go through that, it couldn't have been all that bad, right? Still, if you're stumped after watching this and you need us to give you a little hand, you can always send us an email and we will do everything we can to help you out. Till next time, take care. Happy Photoshopping.